Now what we're going to talk about are the weapons that the German Army used throughout the war. The first weapon that we're going to talk about is the standard weapon of the German Army, the most populous weapon with over 18 million constructed, is the K98 rifle. Gefreiter Beer is holding up the K98. Now this is a standard bolt action rifle. If you're not familiar with that term, after every round you have to rechamber another round to the bolt using the action on the lever. Now this weapon fires an 8mm round. Maybe he's going to show you rounds. There you go. They come in a stripper clip of 5 rounds. When you open the bolt, as you see the bolt is open, there's a little groove up in the receiver that you can put that stripper clip in, and then you can load that weapon. He will load it. Now the weapon's loaded and cocked and ready to go. Now on the back of the bolt, there are 3 safety positions. That's a full safety right there. In that position, the trigger's not going to squeeze and the bolt is not going to open. If he puts it up in the middle position, again, it will not fire up a round, but now he can open the bolt if he needs to. And then all the way to the left is full fire position. Now the effective range on this weapon is about 500 yards. And again, like I said, this is the standard weapon of the German Army. It's a very effective bolt-action rifle, and it's a very accurate bolt-action rifle. Probably the best bolt-action rifle of the war. I know a few people will say that the Springfield might be a little more accurate. It all depends on the individual shooter, but this weapon has a much stronger design on the bolt. It's very, very prone to working good all the time. There's very few malfunctions in this. Now, many countries use this. These rifles were exported to Spain, to Turkey, Brazil, Argentina, Yugoslavia, and some of these weapons remained in military service all the way up until the early 1960s. Now, one thing too, with the standard soldier carrying this rifle, he would also have a sidearm. Every German soldier carried a sidearm. Now, NCOs and officers carried pistols, but privates and enlisted men, they carried bayonets. So there's your standard bayonet that's for that rifle. Now, he'll mount it so you can see what it looks like mounted on the rifle.
I always wondered what that was for.
Now, that could be for close combat. He could even use that for trying to detect mines ad hocly. It will throw the balance off on the rifle when firing it, so they generally didn't fire them with the bayonets mounted too often, unless they absolutely had to. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is Gefreiter Beer is going to fire all 5 rounds off this K98. And you can see that a trained soldier, even though it's a bolt-action rifle, he can still fire those rounds fairly quickly. So yes, there's an advantage to semi-auto, but it's not a great of an advantage as a lot of people realize that it is. Okay, fire free, Gefreiter Beer. Okay, so that was all 5 rounds. You see, he fired those fairly quickly. And he was firing them, taking an aimed shot. Because that was the principle behind the bolt-action rifle, was the aimed shot. The idea of suppressive fire hadn't totally come into effect at this time. So now we're going to go to the next evolution up from this rifle, is the semi-automatic rifle. We have Sandy Hoffman here. He's going to fire the G43. Now this one here, they call it Hitler's Garand. This is a semi-automatic rifle, and this is very similar to an American M1 Garand. The main differences are the magazine system is a little bit different, and the gas exchange system is different. It's a little harder to maintain than what the Garand has, but the magazine system on this actually works a little bit better. It holds 10 rounds in the box, where the Garand only holds 8. And it's an external magazine, where the Garand's is an internal magazine that has an end block. Now, when you empty a Garand rifle, does anybody know what it does? Well, what's it do? Yeah, it pings. Well, what happens with that ping? Well, the enemy can hear it. And when the Americans first started fighting the Germans in North Africa, the Germans caught on to that very, very quickly, that they could hear when their rifles were unloaded. And American fire discipline wasn't completely developed yet, so you have all the men in a squad firing at the enemy. And the Germans learned this, so what they would do, they would bait the American squads, and they'd send out just like a proxy target, get the whole American squad to unload on it, and then they know, well, hey, they're unloaded, now we attack. And that's part of what led to the disaster at Kasserine Pass. So the American Army quickly redeveloped their tactic and said, no, only half the squad can fire at any given time because of this tactic. Now, with G43, once this weapon is unloaded, the magazine stays in place, and the soldier can actually take the same stripper clips that you saw with the K98 and load them through the top of the weapon without replacing the magazine, which is another advantage. The main disadvantage, though, compared to the Garand, is the fact that this weapon was developed after a Tokarev, the Russian semi-automatic, which was not as mechanically reliable as a Garand was. So we're going to go ahead now, and Sandy Hoffman's going to fire the G43, and you can see the little bit of the difference between a semi-auto and a bolt action. Fire free. So now his weapon's unloaded, but he can change the magazine, or he could have put another strip of rounds right through the top. He'll demonstrate that. So now that weapon's ready to go again. So it's that quick. It's fairly quick. Now, not all the soldiers carried this, mainly because it was a problem for them to maintain it and keep it clean, and the training involved, and it's a little difficult to make versus the bolt action. Okay, anybody have any questions on that so far? Anything? Okay, so now we're going to go to the next weapon of the standard soldier, and that's the grenade. The German army had a love of grenades. Now, Feldwebel Reichert here is holding up the standard grenade, the D-24 Stilgranate. That's what, does anybody know what the nickname of that grenade was? Well, what is it?
Potato masher?
Potato masher, that's right. That's because it looks like a potato masher. Does anybody know why it's a stick grenade? You can throw it a little farther, but German boys didn't play baseball like American boys did, nor did any of the European boys. They played soccer instead, so they came up with the idea of grenades on sticks. Now, the one difference between this and an American grenade, this is a purely concussion grenade, which means there's no shrapnel involved with this grenade at all. It's all concussive force. And the German army, what they would use that for is to disorient their enemies. They could throw this grenade on, and then while they're putting their heads down or they're a little stunned from the explosion, the rest of the squad can move in and neutralize that position. Now, in a defensive position, if they needed to have shrapnel, they had shrapnel sleeves that they would put on top of the head. They would flip in. Okay, now to fire this grenade, you notice you don't see any pins or anything on it. So what the soldier would do is he would take the bottom cap off, and then you would see the porcelain bead fall out. He would pull that, that's his fuse. So he would pull that, and the grenade was armed, and then he could throw it. Now that grenade has a 4 to 5 second fuse. Okay, that's 4 to 5 seconds. That means what you see in the Hollywood movies where the German soldier runs up and he throws the grenade, and the American soldier picks it up and he throws it back. That did not happen. It did not work that way. That's more than 4 to 5 seconds. Now, another tactic the Germans would do with these grenades, they would take some of them and put a 1 second fuse on them. Now, you say, why would they put a 1 second fuse on them? Because when he pulls his pin, where's 1 second at? He'll show you. He pulls his pin, boom, 1 second. It's right there. So you're thinking, wow, why would they do that? Well, why they would do that is they would take those grenades and leave them in their position and they're in retreat. So the enemy would come up and find them and they'll, oh, well, we'll use their munitions against them. So when they go to use that grenade, 1 second, it's bad news for that soldier. Now the Americans and the British, they learned from that very, very fastly, and they gave orders, do not use unspent munitions from the German army. The Russians, however, never learned until the very end of the war, fell for the same trick time after time again. So now the explosive radius on that grenade, it's about 15 feet from wherever it lands. And then obviously, you know, it's going to go as far as that soldier can throw it. Now the German army also had a grenade that looks similar to the American grenade. That's called the egg grenade. Again, it's the same principle. It's a concussion grenade, and they could put a fragmentation sleeve on it. It's not quite as numerous as the stick grenades, but they still had them, and they would use a mixture of both. And with this one, can everybody see the little blue top on it? That's the fuse. You would unscrew that, and it would dangle by a little string. Now, we don't have a string on that one, but imagine the string. And again, he would pull it. 4 to 5 seconds later, it would explode. So pretty much the same principle. They had two types. That grenade is a newer grenade for them. They started developing them before the war, where the stick grenades are a throwback from World War I. The same with the K98. K98 was basically used in World War I, but it was called the G98. It was a little longer. So they're still using some of the World War I weaponry, just modifying it, making it a little more modern, and it's still just as effective. Okay? So, going from there, we're going to talk about the main weapon of the infantry squad, which is the machine gun. In the German army, the machine gun is the killing arm of the squad. The riflemen are there to support that machine gun. Where in the American army, the riflemen are the killing arm and the machine gun supports them. It's two separate theories, but in reality and in practice, they work the same. They have the same effect on the battlefield. Now, here, Anton, let's stand up with that weapon. This weapon, unloaded, weighs about 28 pounds. So it was a fairly heavy weapon, whereas like the rifle, it's about 9 pounds. Now, this one here is the MG42. It was predecessed by the MG34, which is the first one. That's the one you would see. It had the rounded barrel with the air cooling sleeve. And the main differences are the MG34 is a milled weapon. So it's more labor intensive to build and costs more. They couldn't keep up with the demand of the military, so they had to come up with another design that was easier to produce. So they came up with the MG42. This weapon is stamped, so it's quicker to build and less costly to build. The operation is similar. There's a few differences. The MG34 will fire at a rate of about 1,100 rounds a minute. The MG42 is going to go upward from 1,200 rounds a minute. Now, yeah, I hear somebody whistle out there. Yeah, that's really fast, isn't it? So when you do the math and you break that down, that is 20 rounds a second. Now, can you understand why they wanted a weapon that fired so fast? Anybody? Okay, what you got? What you got? Exactly, suppression. So if it takes the soldier 3 seconds to run from this cover to that cover, that gunner could put 60 rounds on him. So there's a good chance that he's going to get a hit or an effect on him. Now, one reason why German machine guns have this look to them versus what the Allies and the Russians were using, the Versailles Treaty forbade Germany from making heavy machine guns. So that's why you don't see the big tripod-mounted water-cooled machine guns like the Americans, the British, the French, and the Russians used. They came up with this idea. This is a light machine gun in this position, in this mode, you could say. But they could put this weapon on a tripod mount called a lafette. that mount would have all sorts of gradation on it where they could zero in their firepower on it, and it had optical sights to make it extremely accurate. This weapon uses an 8mm weapon. It uses the exact same round as the rifle. Now, part of the differences are maybe on the standard belt of ammunition, which is 50 rounds. You might have every 5th round might be an armor-piercing round, or it might be a tracing round to help zero your fire in the light mode. In the heavy mode, they could put, they would have basically placards on their lafette of positions, and they would name the positions. And they could, you know, the squad leader would tell them, oh, well, here, fire on this position, and they could just zero in on it within seconds. Now, the one design on this weapon is every 250 rounds by the textbook, you should change the barrel. So there's a gate valve on it. You can see the gate valve right here, and you would hit that forward, and that door swings out and it lets the barrel come out. So the soldier would pull the barrel out, and then he could put another one in. Now, obviously in the field, it didn't always work that way. Sometimes you're under fire, and you have to keep firing. But in ideal conditions, every 250 rounds, which is one box of ammunition, he would change that. So the number 2 gunner would be bringing the new ammunition. He'd be putting it in. He feeds it in right here. The starting tab comes down this side. The gunner changes the barrel. When he closes the barrel in, he pulls the starting tab, locks it in, he's ready to go. Now, you see in the movies where they say, oh, you know, we're going to get that MG42, we're going to take him out when he changes barrels. Well, a trained crew is changing this barrel in about 4 seconds. It is not that slow. So, and that's just an average trained crew. So what we're going to do now, we're going to go ahead and fire this MG42. We're going to show you that. They called it Hitler's buzzsaw. And one of the reasons why they called it Hitler's buzzsaw is because of the rapid rate of fire. And it would fire the rounds so fast that you could not hear the individual rounds go off. You would hear, like on a standard American 30 caliber or the Russian Maxims, you could hear the rounds, you know, pop, 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 pop. This fires so fast it sounds like you're taking a bolt of cloth and ripping it. And the U.S. Army put out information saying, well, the MG42's bark is worse than its bite, so don't be afraid of it. That was purely propaganda, so that the soldiers would not hesitate in the line of fire of this. This is a lethal weapon, and especially in the hands of just even an adequate crew. In fact, in the German Army, if this crew were to lose their weapon, they would probably disband that squad and put them in another unit, because that's how important this weapon is. Okay, so now one thing I do want to, you know, inform everybody on, we're firing blanks out of this, so you got to be a little patient, because sometimes these weapons don't want to feed blanks as well as they feed live rounds. So there might be a little burp or something, so just bear with us. And so what we're going to do, we're going to fire a couple short bursts, and then we'll fire a long burst. Okay? Okay, Jaeger, fire! Wow. Yeah, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? Did you hear the individual rounds? That's actually firing slower with those blanks. Those blanks tend to fire a little bit slower than the real rounds would have. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to go do some of the specialty weapons that the German Army had. So we're going to come back over to Feldwebel Reichert. And he's going to show you a weapon I'm sure you've all seen before, the MP40. That's a submachine gun. Now this weapon fires a 9mm round. And it's fully automatic, and it has 30 rounds in a magazine. And it will shoot 500 rounds a minute. Now it's not as fast as that, but it's as fast as an average automatic weapon. The one downfall to this weapon is its short range. It doesn't have a lot of range. I mean, we're talking this maybe 200 yards effective range on it. One of the reasons why is because this was carried by squad leaders, assistant squad leaders, and officers, and their role wasn't to be providing fire. Their role was to direct the men. and then they only fired when their lives depended on it or when they absolutely needed to. Now, in a street fight, this is a great weapon because the ranges are short and you're putting a lot of firepower out. Now, and you notice he unfolded the extendable stock on it. That's a new feature for a weapon like this. First time a weapon ever had anything like that. MP40 is actually the first weapon in the world to have been completely made without any organic parts. And organic parts, I mean like a wooden stock or anything. It's all completely Bakelite and steel. Okay, the weapon has, again, it has a fire position, a safe position where he cocks it back and he can lock the hammer back. There's a safe position where it won't fire. Or he can deploy it forward and then it's ready to fire. And you see, while he's got it cocked, you can see the bolt is open. That's because it's an open blowback bolt design. So as long as it's firing, that bolt stays open and it ejects out the brass while stripping a new round off the magazine to fire by forcing it up into the firing cone. So Thornwebel Reichert is going to go ahead and he's going to fire the MP40. There you go, there's the MP40. Like I said, you know, does anybody know the nickname of the MP40? No, that's what the Americans had.
Wasn't it burp gun?
No, the GIs did call it a burp gun, and I heard Schmeisser over there, yeah. A lot of guys called it the Schmeisser. And the reason why, they thought Hugo Schmeisser designed the weapon, but he did not. He designed the magazine for it. He's famous for designing the MP-18 Irma from World War I. So now what we're going to do, we're going to go from this, we're going to go to a weapon that is completely new for World War II. It's the very first assault rifle in the world. And that is the Sturmgewehr 44. Sandy Hoffman's going to show you that Sturmgewehr. Now the very first thing, when you look at this weapon, you tell me, what does it look like? Yeah, that's right, it looks like an AK-47. Even though Kalashnikov said, oh, I did not design the AK-47 after the Sturmgewehr 44, even though the Russians captured the factory where this weapon was designed. So I'll leave you to make that call, whether you think what the truth is or not. Like I said, this is the very first assault weapon in the world. This weapon is a semi-automatic or a full automatic. Now the German army could have had these weapons as early as 1942, but Hitler in his infinite wisdom decided, oh well, we don't need them, we want our soldiers with aimed rifle shots, not realizing that the name of the game is suppression fire and making the enemy keep his head down. The generals begged him for this weapon and he constantly vetoed it and nixed it and said no. Till finally somebody came up with the idea, we'll change the actual designation from the Sturmgewehr to the MP. So they'll call it the MP-44, where MP stands for machine pistol. So Hitler looks at the requisition, oh well, it's a machine pistol, yeah, go ahead and issue them to the troops. So then the troops started getting them. Now, this also is an 8mm weapon. However, it fires a different round. It's what's called a Kurtz round, and it's much, much shorter. Here's the round. It's a lot shorter than the standard rifle round. And the reason for that was the standard rifle round was so powerful, it was hard to control that weapon. So they came up with the idea of shortening it and changing the load to make it a little more easier to maintain and handle for the soldiers. Now, we've heard a lot of veterans say that this was one mean weapon, and they sure hated going against these. And it had a very distinctive sound. So what we're going to do, we're going to have Sandy Hoffman fire it. He's going to fire a couple rounds of semi-auto, and then he'll do some auto rounds. Fire fly?
No, look. I can see why I like it. The wrong wheel.
Yep. Yeah, see, that's what I was talking about with blanks. They like to jam up. Now, You heard how that sounded. That the real round coming out of there is much louder than that. That's just a light load of a blank, because we have to, on any semi-automatic or automatic weapon, we have to put a fire suppressors on the barrel so it will recoil again. Oh, here we go. It's not stripping the rounds off. Now again, this one, it's going to fire about 500 rounds a minute, just like the MP. The main difference between it and the MP is this is a lot longer range weapon. This one here, you probably could shoot that about 1,200 yards on that with an effective fire. Now, it's a 30-round magazine. And I think he might be, are you out of rounds? It's not the feed issue? Okay. All right, well, let's see if we got it. Yeah, okay, we got the idea, right? Yeah, give him a hand. That was tough for him. Okay, so that's all the basic weapons. Now, of course, there were other weapons the German Army used. They had rifle grenade launchers for the K-98. You come up to our camp, we can show you one of those. Of course, you all heard of the Panzerfaust and the Panzerschrecks. We can talk to you about those up in our camp. So that concludes our weapons demonstrations. Anybody have any questions? Thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you guys for coming. Any questions? Anything before you leave? Because the German army believed in neutralizing their enemy. They didn't necessarily need to kill everybody. They just wanted to neutralize them to make them ineffective. Because the German army took large amounts of prisoners. So, you know, I know the standard memes for the German army, oh, they were bloodthirsty soldiers, but they really weren't. They were just like anybody else. You know, they wanted to go home too. So their whole idea was to neutralize the enemy as quick as possible, and that follows in with the whole theory of the blitzkrieg. Yeah. In and out before the enemy even knows what's happening. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. So everybody now, like I said, we have German camps up at the top of the hill, so we hope everybody comes up and visits us. Okay, so have a wonderful day.